Roman Iselin. He's a managing director of Johnson&Johnson Medical Device, Switzerland. He has been with the company for more than 8 years and is an experienced leader with a demonstrated history of working in the international hospital and healthcare industry for more than 19 years. He's a board member of Johnson&Johnson and also of the Swiss medtech association. He is an advocate and pioneer for value-based healthcare models, transforming the healthcare system, whereby using digitalization as an enabler. Ja, Roman, herzlich willkommen und it's your stage, it's your time. Thank you for coming.
Besten Dank, Dino. Guten Morgen miteinander. Good morning, everybody. I'm really glad to be here at the Crypto Festival to share with you some insights from J&J, but also from the medtech industry overall, and how relevant digitalization is for this industry. As I have prepared this presentation and in 3 parts I would like to share with you. First of all, as I'm sure not everybody in the audience is so familiar with Johnson&Johnson, I would like to give you a little bit more background on Johnson&Johnson, in particular also the footprints and the activities Johnson&Johnson is having in Switzerland. Then second, I would like to take you for a moment in the medtech, in the very exciting world of the medtech industry in Switzerland. I'm sure you can get some insights here which you haven't known yet about the medtech industry in Switzerland. And third, let's talk about digital healthcare and how the medtech industry, and in particular with an example how J&J is driving digitalization of healthcare. So that would be the 3 topics I would like to cover. First, feel free to use the chat if there's any question coming up. Talking about Johnson&Johnson, for the ones of you who are not so familiar, Johnson&Johnson is a large or the largest healthcare company. We are actually working on the prevention, diagnostic, and therapy side, so really across the entire continuum of care for the patients. We are working in Johnson&Johnson in 3 different sectors. One sector, and our largest sector, it's the pharmaceutical sector. Be more precise, that's the company Janssen, which you might be familiar. Then the second sector, which our second largest sector, which I'm representing, it's the medical device, or in the meantime, we're saying it's the medtech sector, as you're going to see later on. And maybe the sector you are most familiar with, just as a customer, it's our consumer healthcare, where you see, classically a product everybody knows, it's the baby shampoo, but there's much more in this sector. There's a lot of different type of products for skin treatment and other type of cosmetic treatment. So that's our world in J&J with these 3 sectors. Now let's be a little bit more specific about Johnson&Johnson in Switzerland. Actually, Johnson&Johnson has very important global operations in Switzerland, a large footprint. You see it here. We are present in Switzerland with all 3 mentioned sectors. We have presence in 9 cantons, and we have 3 manufacturing sites we are running in Switzerland. Beside that, we have a lot of operative activities, as mentioned, on the manufacturing side, but also we have important R&D work, in particular in the pharmaceutical, but also in the medical device sector. All in all, we have over 5,000 employees working for Johnson&Johnson in Switzerland. So it's really a very large footprint we are having here, with quite some relevant, significant investments we are making in Switzerland. If you look at the Swiss map, on where do we have these sites and where we are present, as mentioned, in many different cantons, and you see here the different logos by sector. So we have a strong presence in Zug. I will come more on that in a minute. We have a very important global production site facility for our pharmaceutical segment business in Schaffhausen, a very important and critical one. And then we have multiple facilities around Solothurn on R&D sites, but also manufacturing sites. And not to forget the recently multiple times in the news mentioned site next to Bern Bümplitz, which is part of the global vaccine network and is playing currently an important role in the development of a vaccine program. Now, some of you be around in Zug. You have maybe seen the building we are operating just actually outside the train, next to the train station. It's an important global international hub we are having here with over 1,000 skilled people. So we have local, regional, but also global functions out of our Zug campus, where we have all 3 different business segments sitting in our Zug campus with a lot of management functions, important supply chain operations, but also finance operation, all be based in Zug. It's a very international campus we are running here, very important for our overall operations. Now, besides management, supply chain, and other operations, as mentioned, we also have quite significant R&D functions in Switzerland in different areas. So for example, in the medtech area, we have in our Solothurn campus, also a large campus similar to the Zug one. There's important R&D, global R&D work happening for our Depisynthese sector, but also our Allschwil pharmaceutical site, for example, is an important site for R&D programs. And beside R&D programs, there's also significant trials happening in Switzerland with partners, with hospitals and physician groups in Switzerland. So it's really many different types of activities we are doing here in Switzerland. So I hope with that I could give you a little bit a glimpse of our activities here locally in Switzerland. Now, I would like, before I move on to the next topic, share with you a little bit. I mean, last year has been in particular challenging year with the whole COVID for all of us. So we just share some reflection on what it meant for us in Johnson&Johnson in Switzerland. Now, maybe to start with, we have in Johnson&Johnson, independently on where we work, in which business segment and where globally, there's one thing which unites us. It's our credo. It's the pillar. It's our value base, which is basically split in 4 paragraphs. It's telling us on the first paragraph on how should we treat our patient. So the second paragraph is talking about the employees. The third paragraph is on how we should, behave in the communities we are living and operating in. And the fourth paragraph is about our obligations toward the shareholder, the financial shareholders. And that's always very relevant, but even more in times of, let's say, crisis like we had last year, where we need to make a decision, where we need to see in which direction we are going, like in the times of unknown, like in the COVID, it was very important for the leadership across the Swiss entities. And I would like to give you an example on how we applied and acted according to our credo during this crisis time. So first of all, in normal times, the supply of pharmaceutical products and medical device products, it's not a problem, right? We produce enough and we can supply the product to our customers, to the patient, ultimately in the right quantity, at the right location, at the right time. However, going into COVID, if I remember back the end of March last year, all of a sudden we were confronted with discussions with hospitals here in Switzerland that there were foreseeable shortages of certain selected product groups. And so it was for us very important to collaborate very closely with our local customers to see on how can we manage this challenging situation where the global supply chains were not as stable as they were. And also demand was very volatile and changed very rapidly. And in close collaboration with the customer, we were able to dedicate the products available to the right sites, to the right patients, that the patients got the treatment they deserved. That was a very important piece. The second one, obviously, it's our commitment as J&J globally on the development of a COVID vaccine. You can read about this in the news. I'm not allowed to declare here any further information due to current registration process, but as you follow in the media, as a significant commitment of Johnson&Johnson to drive a COVID vaccine program. So that's definitely a very strong commitment from Johnson&Johnson. The third piece, it was the impact on our performance. Our medtech sector was mostly affected by the COVID crisis. As you might remember, due to capacity restrictions in the hospitals in many countries globally, regionally in Europe, but also in Switzerland, there were restrictions in terms of elective procedure, or for some time elective procedures were not allowed any longer. So we had to really also our customers, and so did we. We were suffering massive financial impacts about last year by these restrictions. Then on the lower part, it was, as we are operating in Switzerland now, to talk a little bit more local about all the COVID guidelines. It was for us very important to constantly follow the guidelines in Switzerland, to adapt them to our different sites, as also, you know, the guidelines are sometimes different between different cantons. So we as J&J were following at any time, or even were most of the time more restrict even than the guidelines in place, to make sure that our employees and our community stay safe. And the fifth piece is the support of our employees and the affected population. What we mean with that, we have for a long-standing cooperation with the Red Cross in Switzerland. And so last year was for us then the time during the crisis to make a significant contribution towards the Red Cross in terms of money, but also in terms of labor, to support on a voluntary program, you know, the Red Cross, so it could serve best the people in the community. I think important also to mention here, we in J&J across Switzerland did not use any of the short-term eligibility money given by the state. That was also a conscious decision we have been taking here for Switzerland. So that just a little bit give you a glimpse on the impact on our business globally and locally on COVID, but also how we try to manage and are still managing these crises. Now let's talk a little bit about medtech, right? For the ones of you who are not familiar, medtech, it's about the treatment of complex surgical diseases. So most of our the treatments we are doing, they're happening in the hospital, in the OR. In the OR, that's where we are operating together with our customers. And we are the largest global medtech company. You see here the different brands. We are working in medtech. And Tepisuntis, that's our brand, which is all around bone. It's about bone healing, bone fixing. So that's a spine, knee, or hip treatment and replacement. The other important platform, it's the Ethicon platform. This is our surgical platforms. That's where we serve the surgical community with devices like endocutters or energy devices to perform surgery. And there's also an important platform here. It's the suture platform, which are used to close the wound after any given surgical treatment. And our third important platform is the CSS, where we have an important platform with Biosense Webster. Biosense Webster, this is our ablation procedures, but also aesthetic medicine and neurovascular, meaning stroke treatment. So these are the areas if you're working in the medical device. Here's just some, give you some impressions, some pictures. So there's a lot of metal, which is used as an implant to bring into the body to fix certain conditions in the body. Most of these implants, there's instruments needed to perform the procedures. And over the recent years, these implants more and more have been enabled with different technology to bring a better visualization, for example, to do the procedures much more minimal invasive, or new technology to measure the data throughout the procedure, or more and more robotic system, which are supporting the physician by the procedures. So it's more from a product to a solution, as in the meantime become in most of the platforms we are playing an enabled technology enabled solution, product solutions. As you might could imagine, there's a lot of training needed. So we have a strong commitment for the personnel in the hospitals, might be physicians, might be nurses and other relevant stakeholders in the healthcare system to train them on the products, to train them on the procedures, on complications, on the use of technologies. So we make significant investments to train physical, hands-on, like with wet lab trainings. For example, in our Solothurn campus, we have a pretty big wet lab. So it's a wet lab. This is almost like an OR condition. So you can, under almost real conditions, train the procedures. But we also do run a lot of courses and more and more also virtual or augmented reality enabled educational programs. Now, the medical device industry in Switzerland, I would just give you some facts on the medtech industry in Switzerland, which you might don't know. And I have these slides from the trade association, Swiss MedTech, and you can see there's around 1,400 companies in the medtech space in Switzerland with over 60,000 employees. It's often also known as the pearl, one of the pearls of Swiss industries, the med tech industry in Switzerland. You can also see it's a very important contributor of the Swiss export, which counting for around 5% of total export of Switzerland. These companies are split all across Switzerland. However, there are certain hubs in terms of manufacturers and suppliers, as mentioned, coming out of historically from the watch industry. There's a lot of activity going on around the Jura mountain. Zug is a very important, the Zug or greater Zug area is a very, very important hub for medtech companies, but also the surrounding areas of our important universities like ETH or EPFL in the Lausanne area. There's quite some medtech hub with, it's a huge ecosystem of different technologies. Now, this industry overall has been developing very nicely over the years. However, there are also quite some challenges in this industry. On one side, there's significant changes happening as we speak in terms of the regulatory system. Europe-wide is moving from a CE approval system to an MDR approval system, which brings quite some cost constraints, but also resource constraints for the entire industry operating in Europe. As mentioned, there's quite an impact on this industry in the last year in terms of COVID, which is driving for many companies had quite an impact on the performance. But I would like to touch today on the MRA. I think that's an important piece that the audience here understands, that the MRA, the mutual recognition agreement, is actually running out by May this year. So actually just in a few weeks from now. And as the current discussion between Switzerland and the EU, there's certain things are not fixed with the institutional agreement. There's at this point of time no agreement how the MRA is might be prolonged or renewed going into June this year. That means that at this point of time, and you might have been reading that in the news, there's quite a risk for patients in Switzerland, but also patients in the European Union, that in June this year, they might not receive the products and the solutions for the procedure and the treatment they deserve. So it's really a call out to all the decision makers, mainly the politicians in the EU and in Switzerland, to find a solution which is in the interest for the patients across Europe, but also for the industry in Switzerland, but also the Europe, to ensure that the free movement of products from Switzerland going to the EU, but vice versa, can kept operate. With this, my third part of the presentation more talks about the digitalization and the relevance of digitalization in healthcare, but more importantly, what the medtech industry is specifically doing to drive that forward. To start with, we talk about the concept of value-based healthcare. It's very relevant to understand if we talk about digital healthcare. Value-based healthcare is a rather old concept, but over the recent years got a lot of momentum. And value-based healthcare always look at the total value for all the stakeholders. That means it puts the outcome of the patient in relation to the cost it takes to produce or to generate these outcomes. This, as you can imagine, if we look at this way at a healthcare system, that automatically means we are looking much more process, end-to-end process. For example, we look at complete patient treatment pathways. We measure much more data, we need much more data, and we measure much more data to get more transparency and to measure quality. And digitalization is an important driver of making that happen, of making it happen that value-based healthcare systems become more and more scalable. Because without, we cannot bring value-based healthcare fully to life if we are not looking at the process and understand them, if we don't bring in standards in these processes and then drive the digitalization. If we do so in the healthcare system, then we are gathering a lot of data. And these data points, you see some data categories here, are the enabler to drive a new concept, to drive new treatment pathway, and ultimately ensure that the best value gets out of the healthcare system. Obviously, there's some obstacles to overcome, like integration of data. Privacy in healthcare is an important topic, but also the overall availability of data. But these are all things which can and need to be fixed. Clearly now, coming out of COVID more and more, COVID is even accelerating this trend. It's accelerating the trend to look much more holistically at the healthcare system and more holistic solutions. With the COVID, as already mentioned, it's really even a stronger need to drive efficiencies in the healthcare system across the entire continuum of care. We see massive pressure on the provider, which is driving further consolidation. We see a shift more and more now happening, be accelerated by COVID, of driving to lower acute settings, like for example, outpatient treatments. Obviously, the adaptability and the use of digitalization gets accelerated, but also new go-to-market models. For example, we as J&J are fastly accelerating new supply chain solutions with our customers, but also have been over the recent years driving, as in the meantime, almost a standard in all cases, models which are based around outcome in the category of like risk share models. So why does it need this digitalization for the hospitals? And why do we need integrated platforms to drive that forward? If we talk about digitalization in healthcare, there's so many players. And you see here some of the relevant stakeholders mentioned playing in this field of the digital healthcare. We can only make digital healthcare really happen in collaboration. There won't be really single standalone solution. It's about, and that's driven by a value-based healthcare concept, bringing different parties, relevant stakeholders together in order to ensure that the processes are be driven along the entire continuum of care, and we can get digitalization independent of any silo, but gathering really the entire patient pathway. Now, in this overall digital healthcare segment, medical device industry plays an important role. You see here some areas where medical device can play an important, is playing an important role. Obviously, more and more the recent year, it has become more consumer oriented, that the consumer, meaning the patient, gets more information, is more informed, like for example, with wearables. That's also a space that more enabling the patient, where we as Johnson play an important role. It's digital enabled healthcare delivery. That means, for example, with virtual support, with augmented reality programs, also a space which is fast moving forward. The care management and support. So this is a lot about the underlying processes that can be supply chain, but also all the programs which help to standardize and get new programs into more the backbone, the administrative part of the healthcare system or hospital. The digitalization of the drug development, more from the pharmaceutical side, and big data. That's an important space where we as J&J also have a lot of efforts, for example, with robotic programs, but also with software programs supporting the physicians and all the stakeholders in the healthcare system to make better informed decision with having more data available. Overall, you can see here in an international comparison of the digitalization of the healthcare system, Switzerland is definitely at the lower end if we compare it to other European countries. So there's really a need in Switzerland to drive digital healthcare forward. And if we look that a little bit closer, you see the different here measured factors. This is by the Bertelsmann. You see first the policy activity around digital healthcare, which is pretty good in Switzerland. And you see the second factor, it's the digital overall readiness. And the last parameter, it's on how do we use the data. And you see here in particular that very limited use is made in the Swiss healthcare system. There's a huge opportunity also compared to other European countries of using data much more, because only if we use data that allows to improve processes, it allows to come up with more intelligent outcome models, which ultimately all with the goal to improve the quality and the outcome for the patient. It's all in the healthcare about quality. You know, we need to drive the quality to improve the quality of the patient. Healthcare in Switzerland, but also in other countries, it is a big burden and a big problem for the population and for the entire system in terms of costs. However, just with pure cost activity, it's not a sustainable approach to drive a sustainable healthcare development. There are limited resources in the healthcare system, and they're going to remain limited resources. So it's about how can we get the best outcome with the resources we are having, and how can we get the best quality with the best indications in the healthcare system. That's in the interest of the patient, and that's the way to drive a sustainable models. These sustainable models, as I started this section of the presentation, it's about value models which are built around the outcome, which look at the entire outcome of the patient, and which allow in a transparent way with data and using digitalization as the enabler to measure these data. So what's our vision to conclude as Johnson&Johnson? I have to say it's not a vision anymore. It's actually what we have been doing over the last year, following on this concept of value-based healthcare. We urge to look at the entire continuum of care, from a pre-operative treatment, the patient is still doing well, till one day an intraoperative treatment in the hospital to the post-operative. So it's looking at the entire continuum of care and having tools available as J&J or with our partners with open platform systems to look at this entire continuum of care. This is the holistic way, and now more specific in the area, to give you a concrete example, in the area of orthopedic, that can be a knee treatment, a knee replacement, or a hip replacement. We have different programs, digital programs, which are helping to empower the patient of preparing him in his treatment, preparing him in the best way possible for the surgical intervention. There's a lot of software available for preoperative planning to plan of what's going to happen in the surgical field the right way. There's now more and more robotic system coming, which enable to treat during the surgical procedures the patient in the best way possible and give here the physician additional support. And the SBI, it's a program we are running which helps the hospital to fully digitalize the surgical procedures. So it helps them to identify the process steps of each surgical procedure, set the standard for each surgical procedure, and then digitalize. And this tool, the SBI, is helping that to drive that in a consistent manner for each type of surgical discipline, and obviously then gathering all the data, which helps the surgical team or the entire hospital team out of this data to draw the right conclusions for further improvements and have a transparent view on all the activities happening. And then post-op, there's different programs which support on an individual base the patient, but also like CSAT, it's a program which help based on the collected data with artificial intelligence to drive further improvements out of a global database of similar or the same type of procedures to draw conclusions on where might be complications or where might be room for further improvements. So that's one concrete example on how we are already operating in the field of orthopedic, but we always look at this entire continuum of care and apply that for all the different disciplines we are working in. And why are we doing that again? We are doing that because that allows us to look at the entire process and measure data out of this process. And by doing so, by looking at the entire process, together with our partners, with the customers and other cooperation partners, if we look at the process, if we standardize the process and if we measure the data, it allows us to measure the outcome and to drive improvements. Here, just as an example from the UK, similar studies here in Switzerland on how we can drive with such approaches. For example, the KPI or influence the KPI of the hospital stay, the number of days a patient stays in the hospital, and how with such an approach over a defined time, the hospital stay time, the length of stay time can get further reduced. We are doing this in Switzerland specifically with many of our customers. Here's just a selection of customers on how we partner around reducing complications, around driving efficiency in the OR, around supporting the patient across the entire continuum of care, or also tackling other topics, for example, in the space of supply chain. This always with a holistic view, according to value-based healthcare, looking at the outcome to be achieved, meaning the total value looked at the outcome for the patient in relation to the cost needed to optimize that. And we have been driving these models with our partner also more and more in our go-to-market models. So I hope with that, I could give you a little bit insight about J&J and in particular our footprint and what we're doing here in Switzerland. Second, give you some insights on the very exciting medtech industry, which is driving a lot of innovation overall, but in particular also enabled with new technology, digital technologies, and thirdly, give you some examples on how medtech is supporting the progress of digitalization in the healthcare system. Thank you very much for your attendance.